Hello and welcome to the latest edition of No Limit with Krzysztof and Luke, a 7 Investing production. This is episode 14. Today is the 29th of March. Krzysztof, as ever, it's a delight to see you. How's it going?
Good morning to you, Luke. I heard it's the end of your ski season.
Yes, my last 24 hours. We got 11 inches of new snow last night, and so I'm looking forward to, like an eager beaver, getting up there and tearing it up for the very last day before I head to San Francisco.
Oh, that's astounding. Skiing is hard, like in the sense that, you know, you're cold and you're on the lifts, right? It takes a lot out of you, right? Do you get kind of acclimated? Do you get kind of used to the season as the season goes on?
Yeah, for sure. You develop like a bunch of muscles that you like wither during the non-ski months. Like just being at altitude, like I was exhausted for the whole first couple of weeks until the body goes, oh heck, I need like a bunch of extra red blood cells. And then you can start being like fit again. So yeah, you definitely do. But then you also accumulate injuries. Like I've wiped myself out in 2 pretty big accidents, both of which took me out for a week each. So, you know, it's all part and parcel. All good fun.
Yeah, live and learn, right?
Yeah.
You are so British. Live and learn.
Stiff upper lip. Yeah. How about yourself? I didn't ask you on the show, but you had that accident a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month or 2 ago now. You made a full recovery from that.
Oh yeah, that was peanuts.
And you're still beating up the big guys in jiu-jitsu?
I am most certainly not. Yeah, you know, the better you get, the better your opponents get. And I'm not in the phase where I was going every day. You know, it's one of those things, if you go every day, you start thinking about it and breathing and living it. Right. I'm kind of down to 3 days a week, which is enough to kind of... I'm kind of treading water, yeah.
You're ready to defend your family's honor if it comes to it, though.
I can't. If it came down to that, I think I could defend my family's honor and yours too. If anyone ever messes with you, even looks at you the wrong way, I got you.
I've got enemies. Watch out! I've got enemies. Hey, I tell you what. One of my potential enemies is Elon Musk. I am not a Twitter Blue subscriber, and he's about to make a bunch of policy changes, which means I kind of have to pay me $7 a month. I notice you've done that already. What's your experience of suddenly getting the blue tick?
I trust Elon, and it's interesting, even though my politics and his don't often align. I've been following his story now for so long. I was pretty deep into trying to understand who this human is, so I'm sure I have a bias and blinder, but I often end up thinking like this guy knows a lot more than I do in terms of engineering and how to build a product, and my own 2 pennies on the issues probably just pretty far inferior and ignorant compared to what he's offering. So the way I think about it is I have learned to use Twitter, I think, in a very powerful and effective way. Put it this way, I've met a lot of people and followed a lot of rabbit holes that were generally educational and had value in terms of networking and connections that taught me an immense amount that I otherwise would not have. And so for me, paying $7 a month for, at this point, the value that I'm getting, I would pay a lot more, put it that way.
Has your experience improved materially as a result of paying your $7, or you just feel a bit more kind of morally balanced? You're paying for the value you get.
I don't know is the thing. It's hard to say for me, honestly, because I guess I have a pretty clear window on how I use it and why I use it. So it certainly hasn't gotten worse. The bots seem to be less effective. There's that, but I didn't really have a huge issue with them beforehand. So I'm still continuing to use it as I did, and hard pressed to say there's been much difference one way or another for me.
Okay, maybe you got some Twitter jiu-jitsu. I'll have to go work on that. I think I'm going to have to pay my $7 anyway. Otherwise, it's going to break for me in mid-April. So look out for the blue tick.
Yeah, I think that ethical piece is not a small thing. When I know I'm using this thing so much and I'm getting so much value, $7 to help the ecosystem go is, I think, completely justified.
Very wholesome. Okay. And if you're not following Krzysztof on Twitter and you're listening, by the way, there's definitely more of you listening than are following us. Go check him out. He's at 7 Flying Platypus. And I'm at 7 Luke Hallard. Hey, getting off that bit of self-promotion, though, I do see Elon allegedly signed up to something else along with a bunch of other folk, possibly even like overnight. I woke up at 4 a.m. I got woken up by raccoons on my patio and ended up down like a Twitter rabbit hole. And I ran into an open letter. Did you see this from the Future of Life Institute?
No, I did not.
Yeah, interesting. I'm not sure if I agree with what it's suggesting, but it's a very interesting point. To give you the exact summary, essentially this foundation have proposed that the world pause giant AI experiments. They've put out an open letter to, especially to kind of big AI founders, people like Musk, Sam Altman, I guess, folk like that. They've got over 1,000 signatures. And what they're suggesting is that we should take a deliberate stop, take a breath, rather than charging kind of headlong into the singularity, possibly the end of humanity, as I was kind of getting a bit wistful about a few weeks ago, and stop developing models that are stronger than GPT-4, which is incredible. Like I'm paying $20 a month for GPT-4 myself now. I get so much value out of it. And they're saying we should actually, rather than continuing to develop deeper and deeper models, which might have emergent capabilities that we don't really understand, let's take a breath and try and make sure these things we're developing are kind to humanity. Basically, we can make sure they're safe, they're giving good information, but essentially trying to rein them in before they get a little bit too far ahead of us. What do you think about that?
So yes, I did see this, Luke. It's so fascinating because this is a topic that I'm about to start teaching in my Consciousness of Animals class. And the last portion of the course will be dedicated to this question of what are humans in the age of AI? What are we becoming? Including, there's a new movement out there that is putting forth a provocative case that it would be better for the earth to have humans destroyed, to make us go away. Because if you think ecologically, George Carlin said this a while back, we're like a bad case of fleas for planet Earth, and the planet will be fine, but we're killing all these other species and so forth. That if you're serious about ecological health, then you gotta consider humanity as a problem, and maybe AI is one way that Earth will solve this problem. We'll kind of do it to ourselves. I think, Luke, that there is much wisdom in what's being asked in this open letter. We're being counseled to have a little patience, right? A little forbearance, that might be the better word, because this tool, it feels to me more powerful, right, than our capacity to handle it. That's the basic, right? I also think that humanity does not have within itself the capacity to slow down. We're too impulsive as a whole. And the self-interested parties, the ones that do not think in a networked way, ecologically, somebody out there will continue developing this.
That's my concern, right? The signatories to the open letter, these will be the sort of ethically minded organizations that kind of buy that idea, but there's still going to be a ton of companies and probably a ton of government-backed actors who are going to charge on regardless.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of the gun debate in the United States.
Right.
It seems to me wise to have serious control over automatic weapons, for example. The counter argument that you hear is that, but then the bad guys are the ones left with them, and then you're defenseless. Right. And I think without gets messy and complicated fast, I get that, but the cynical or skeptical part of me understands that. If you take the moral, wise path, you will still leave yourself vulnerable to the bad actors, and that could, in fact, be true. It seems like the missing piece in all of this for me is this idea that there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? That in the end, people have to sacrifice something to get something. And we're not so good at the sacrificing part, right? We want to feel safe. We want to do the right thing. We want to take our time with AI, but to do that, we'd have to sacrifice, let's say, profits and whatever. And so we want both. And then in the end, it saddens me to say this, I'm skeptical of our ability to hit pause, even though it's the obviously wise thing to do.
Yeah, I think I agree. And there's an interesting idea I hadn't thought of. Did you listen to the Sam Altman, co-founder of OpenAI, interview with Lex Friedman this week?
It's in my queue.
Really good. So an idea he put forward was that it's probably positive in the far future that there are many AIs developed by different labs, and if we do get these kind of emergent capabilities, essentially you'll have, lots of different AIs with perhaps different motivations, and then in some ways they'll become self-regulating with each other. Sounds like such a bizarre thing to say, but almost kind of we are kind of creating these gods effectively. Let's just create a whole bunch of them, and hopefully they'll regulate each other because we won't be able to.
Yeah, one thing I would like to bring up for our listeners is that my understanding of the AI landscape is still that the current AI, the ChatGPT version of it, is nothing close to general AI, which is the kind that we're really worried about, the kind that could teach itself and basically think for itself without parameters. And the people that have been working in this field now for decades continue to say that as fast as the bounded AI is learning, that is still nowhere near the call it the scary one, and that the gap there is still huge. And I do remember actually seeing a Twitter poll about this question, and like, how many years do you think it will take for the gap to be closed? And if memory serves right, Elon piped in and said he thinks it's 10 years or less.
I think
which is opposite to what the experts are saying. Well, other experts beyond him.
Well, I suppose that's in the spirit of this Paul's AI paper, right? It might be closer than we think, so that would suggest that we should suddenly start to behave fairly cautiously if we're in this field. And if it's going to develop in a way that's bad for humanity, we're probably not going to know about it until it's too late.
Yeah, it does not give me the warm fuzzies to tell you the truth. I mean, we already know, right, that a human, we run on primitive software because we've been evolving for 300,000 years, in hunting, gathering kinds of groups. And all of a sudden, the technological industrial revolution is only, 200 years ago? Right. So, basically, not even a blink of an eye. And we can't handle what we already have, right? If we're in computers and the internet, it's already too much for us. Social media, that's a great example, right? Yeah. That's a perfect example. That's 20 years old? And now, from the front lines at a university, my students are telling me they are depressed, anxious, addicted. They walk into the classroom, eyes on the glue, all of them, every single one. And when I tell them, put your phones away at the door when you walk into this room, it's a challenge, right? But they self-diagnose that way. So point being, already we have too much power and not enough capacity to deal with it. So now that the robots are here, my goodness.
I totally agree with all of that. But at the same time, if we do put pause on AI, these capabilities are so exciting. And seeing the step up from GPT 3.5 to 4, I'm using them both. It's incredible. And seeing what developers have where they have even more capabilities than I do, even as a paying user. Heck, I really want to get this stuff, and I want to see what GPT 5 and 6 look like and how they can make my life, immeasurably better in ways I can't imagine. But at the same time, I don't want them to murder me. So let's see. Yeah.
Yeah, the old, yeah. I want to ask you, I just haven't had the time and bandwidth really to go through all the tutorials and so forth, but I also paid for the subscription to version 4. Can you give me an example of what a big difference you notice between the two models are?
A lot more depth and sophistication in the results I'm getting. A couple of times I've put the same question into both, and I've just got a more nuanced answer from ChatGPT 4. Okay. I think 3 or 3.5 is kind of optimized for speed. So 4 is definitely slow. It's kind of ponderous watching the words trickle out, but you're getting a better quality conclusion.
Okay. I signed up for the development when you connect the AI to the internet, right?
Okay. Oh, right. Cool. I haven't played with that. Right.
But I believe I was put on the wait list and I'm still on it, so I haven't experienced that. Because that's a big... That, I think, will be the mind-blowing one.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we're not limited to, I believe, September 20 of 21, which is 2 years ago.
That's it. Yeah.
I can't wait to see that. I'm in the process of updating the picture for 7 Investing because I'm the only one not wearing a jacket and tie. So I look like a hooligan, hooligan from off the streets. But I was trying to upload a photo of myself and have AI add a jacket and tie. And it kind of, it still looks AI-ish, so I don't think it would work. Although that might actually be pretty cool. So I don't know if you've used the robot in this way, where you actually upload text and, pictures or other stuff.
Yeah, you should check out, I'm using Midjourney, but I think you have to pay to use Midjourney version 5. But apparently that is, it's producing incredible results of real people. So yeah, that's probably the way to go if you want to do a real flying platypus in a suit. Seeing there's no way to get you in an actual suit.
Right, that's right. That's right. I did type in my name and I did write, my name plus suit and tie, and I got back pictures of very Polish looking people that were not me. I was like, oh man.
Cool. Hey, so I wouldn't check in with you because I'm heading home soon, and Katrina tells me I have a box of magic mind waiting for me when I get there. So we're talking about super intelligent AIs. Are you still taking this stuff? Are you feeling super intelligent yourself?
Not this morning. But I feel.
Is that why you're so sleepy looking?
Yeah, I don't know what's off. Something's off with me this morning, Luke. But I love this stuff. I generally love this stuff. Here's how it fits in my day. I only eat dinner at 6 p.m. So I've taken to doing a workout in the morning. First thing, I drink a glass of athletic greens to get my vitamins. And then I have a coffee from about 9 till 11. Coffee gets me through to about 1. And then around 1 p.m., I take my Magic Mind. That gets me to dinner. Basically, the feeling of the Magic Mind juice creates this sensation for me that's a little bit like coffee, but unlike coffee, something happens where I think I deepen in creativity. I don't quite understand it, but coffee gets me energized, but this stuff makes me more excited about new ideas than I feel when I'm not drinking it. So it kind of plays 2 roles for me. The get me through to dinner, get me through the fast energetically, and creatively I get a lift. And also, this is pretty important, I don't feel many of the negative side effects of stimulants or nootropics or shakiness or weird stuff. I just kind of feel pretty like I'm riding a good wave.
Cool. All right. Sounds like a strong endorsement. I'm looking forward to checking it out when I get back to London next week.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what you think and what kind of smart things you'll have to say.
Awesome. So if you're taking Magic Mind yourself, let us know on the Twitters what you think, what your own results have been. So Krzysztof, you've been reading as ever, I gather. What's your latest book?
The latest book is called The Grid, The Fraying Wires Between Americans and Our Energy Future.
Yeah, interesting.
It was Bill Gates's one of his 5 favorite books in 2016. So it's a little dated, I guess 7 years now. But 2 things. I think is extraordinarily well written. The author, Gretchen Bakke, Bakke, is an cultural anthropologist, which is the same thing that my wife is, curiously enough. But I never, it's just the highest level of writing that I think you could come across. It's so engaging, so thoughtful, and I'm a sucker for good prose. So some people might think, oh yeah, reading about the electrical grid, that's going to suck. I had the exact opposite experience, just on that literary level. The other thing is, it is kind of astonishing to me that something like electricity, which is now such a fundamental part of our life, including here in Texas. I've lost it recently twice in 2 years for an extended period of time during a very cold freeze. And you get reminded very quickly just how miserable life gets. Not that we can't make a fire anymore, and like survive, but when so much of our modern day life revolves around devices, and you can't, for example, go to work and do work without the internet or your computer, it's shocking. It's truly shocking what a dominant force electricity has become. So what's even more shocking to me was how, and she talks about this a little bit, how when we walk around day to day, at least maybe I'll speak for myself, you don't notice. You kind of block out things like utility poles and wires and even how any of it works, right? I was so stupidly ignorant about the grid that I kind of became temporarily embarrassed for myself. Like, how could, when I put the two things together, the force of electricity, how essential it is, and how I knew nothing about it, I was like, how could this be?
So okay, I think I understand this stuff. What's a surprising fact then that I might not be aware of?
Oh my goodness. Maybe this is an interesting thing that renewable energy, so there's the old grid and all the new renewables coming online. And I thought something like renewable energy is just a good thing any way you slice it. But it turns out that utilities have a business to run, and things like renewable energies sometimes add a whole nother layer of complexity to how the old school operations. So for example, when you have surges of energy coming online from, say, too much sun or too much wind, that could actually overpower the grid. So all of a sudden, the way we are evolving, the way our grid is evolving, it's not just good and bad, old and new, or we want more new, more renewable. It's a way more complex algorithm that's evolving. So that's one thing to consider. And this actually segues to why, for the most part, I started looking into this. You will now see me focusing a lot more on batteries as investment opportunities. With this understanding, now the deeper understanding that I now have of the grid, you also learn that one of the key components and technological maybe barrier to an effective grid is storing of electricity, and that it was the technological, we still weren't there yet, so to speak, to solve that problem, but we are now. And so the opportunity from an investment standpoint in investing in, call it, battery storage, or figuring out ways to harness the surpluses of electricity that we make, is such a crucial problem to solve. And the effects of that problem, the consequences of solving that problem or not are immense, absolutely immense. And you'll see this, for example, in the supply and demand currently, for example, that Tesla has with its megapacks. They, I believe, if memory serves right, the orders at the moment won't be fulfilled until 2025 going at max capacity. So there's such a backlog that even Tesla, a monolith like Tesla, won't get to, let alone all the low players in the field.
Is that because their manufacturing capability is constrained because they have to build these gigafactories, or is it also supply of raw materials like lithium and things like that?
It's I believe a combination that, for the most part, especially COVID, there were supply chain issues, right? That most of the material had to go to the cars, but now Tesla is building its own independent megapack factory in Lothrop, California, so they are scaling as quickly as they can. But regardless, it's still, anytime you have a situation where the demand is so much greater than the supply, you know that's a business opportunity. I mean, in the basic Econ 101 way, right? Now I understand that it's not just Tesla that's the gorilla in this space that's going to have massive margin increases and massive revenue, and I mean all kinds of good stuff that's going to hit its balance sheet. But that there's all these other players in this world that have similar supply and demand issues in their favor, that are working in little niches of the grid, because this grid thing is, I love this idea, the biggest machine that we have, and it's antiquated and it's patched up and it has all these problems, and now you have entrepreneurs really trying to take advantage of this battery landscape now that the technology is finally good enough to put out in the world. So I haven't been this excited about a new industry for me as an investor in a long time.
And without saying any names, maybe, so apart from Tesla, are there other companies in this space that you're looking at closely?
Yes, there are two more right now that I'm taking a very, very hard look at, and you'll definitely hear about them from me in the next 2 months. My next recommendation, I guess at this point, this episode will release in April, right? So yep. Subscribers will know what my recommendation is for April, and it is a small battery company that most people have never heard of, with a extraordinarily unique catalyst and setup that if it hits, it's going to hit big.
Very good. Well, nice to have like you developing your expertise in this area. I always feel a bit weird as a 7 investing advisor, because I'm a bit like a platypus too, and I'm all over the board. I don't think I'm an expert in anything. I'm kind of more of a jack of all trades. And if I'm developing expertise in anything, it's probably fintech. But oh, geez, that's boring. Like I'd rather find something a bit more interesting to become an expert in.
This will tie together the things we've talked about this morning, Luke. Here's how I do things. My generalist sensibility gets me looking in a particular corner, right? Then I get interested. I read the top level stuff, like for example, batteries, like YouTube, how do batteries work, right? Just basic education, right? Then I find a book that I think is the most recommended or gives me the next layer of depth. Meanwhile, while I'm doing this, I'm on Twitter, and actually I begin following experts. And I don't therefore have to be the expert, because I simply know who to look for. And then we have our ChatGPT buddy, right? So now I know the questions to ask. For example, because I'm not an expert in batteries, what's the difference between, say, lithium ion and zinc battery? That's an important question for me. So type it up, and ChatGPT 4 gives me the expert's view on all of that.
Yep.
Or maybe not. Maybe it's still not there. But that's the point is, like, spread the resources around, and if you know what to ask, I don't know if expertise is required, is what I'm saying.
Well, it's like having like this world of experts, like real human experts on Twitter that are accessible because of the nature of Twitter, and the world's most kind of erudite librarian, I guess, with GPT-4. So yeah, you can develop your own expertise super fast. It's actually quite interesting how it's playing into a topic I would like to talk about today as well, around what's happening with the homeschooling boom. Should we dive into that?
Yeah.
I saw quite an interesting Twitter thread by George Mack, and he just had, a few days ago, a bunch of interesting stats, what's being ignored by the media but will be studied by historians. And I've just picked three of these stats out of his thread. Wouldn't mind chatting through with you. One ties into what we were just chatting about, and it's what George frames as the homeschooling boom. So evidently, I haven't fact-checked any of this stuff, but the sources look good. Evidently, in the early 1970s, less than 80,000 kids were homeschooled in America. At the end of 2021, 5 million kids were being homeschooled. And George's insight there was that was probably pandemic-driven. Like in many cases, kids couldn't go to school, so kind of parents got forced into becoming a teacher as well as trying to hold down their own jobs. But many parents have realised actually they can do a pretty good job of this. There's an interesting sort of investing question, which companies are enablers and kind of helping this homeschooling boom. Is it a good thing? I think it probably is. But tools like GPT are really going to, potentially become like the ultimate tutor, helping kids learn and understand and explore ideas in more interesting ways.
Are you asking for my take?
Yeah, for sure. Especially as someone who works in the education sector.
This cuts both ways, and I think there's a lot of advantage to doing it yourself, especially if you do it, not as a shortcut. If you're a parent who cares, or you're a young person who cares and you really want to learn, a lot of school time, I would say, is a waste, like inefficient. Sort of like, it's my feeling about most meetings. People just like hearing themselves talk, and then it just, right? So you're not learning nearly as quickly or as much as you could. But the other side feels to me that an embodied emotional and social intelligence is also necessary to have the full experience of what it means to be a thinking and effective human. And we know this, from, say, negotiators and how people do in business, business deals. It matters, right? Luke, you know this from your own career, right? Like, it matters how you show up to things. It matters to what extent you could empathize with another human, understand what they're saying, meet them on their wavelength emotionally, socially. And somehow we'll need to figure out how you could get that piece of the human experience merged with, say, the intellectual content loading stuff.
Yeah, no doubt. Agree. And that was a sort of challenge even for grown-ups, right? Coming out of the pandemic, we all, to some extent, forgot how to socialize with each other. So we've had to relearn that.
Yeah, and it's not a small thing. So I don't know if I had a child. I don't know if I probably would consider homeschooling seriously.
Cool.
Plus maybe something like an athletic club, right? To match the other end, right?
Yeah, that's a good shout. Let's dive into another one of George's stats and insights, and it sort of links to the last one. So a rise in homeschooling means kids will start building businesses earlier. The ability to do this with just a smartphone and internet connection. So, and his stat is the highest paid YouTubers. So evidently today, the highest paid YouTuber is an 11-year-old kid called Ryan Kaji, who reviews toys on YouTube. And in 2020, he made $26 million. And he was 9 years old at the time. So that's pretty cool. Like they're suddenly, like the parents are farming their kid out to earn a ton of money, and he's probably having fun doing it at the same time. But it is interesting, and again, like an investing angle on this, right? Tools like Shopify, Stripe, these kind of fintechs, so easy to start a business today, and YouTube and these distribution platforms. But it's kind of democratized, made it really easy to get started and potentially be successful in business. I think this is it's an inflection point we're all aware of, but suddenly seeing 9-year-olds making millions and millions of dollars probably makes it a bit stark, brings it home.
I want to examine an assumption in there, because as soon as you said he's probably having a good time doing this.
Okay.
Well, I haven't seen any of these videos, right? But I think I do know that in order to eventually be a genuine YouTuber with any kind of revenue, there's a lot of, call it production. You can't just wing it, right? We could assume that.
Maybe start off winging it, but okay. If you're in that kind of dough, then you probably have a bit of a team behind you eventually.
Because as soon as you say he's probably having a good time doing it, you know who I thought of? A 4-year-old Andre Agassi.
Okay.
Or Serena Williams. The tennis players who had the kind of maniacal parents that put a racket in their hand at age 4 or 3 and said, you go stand on this tennis court and you hit balls. And, from Agassi's mature adult perspective, that was borderline cruelty, or not even borderline, right? That was abuse. And so I wonder, if you're a 9-year-old kid and you're making $26 million on YouTube, how much fun, unless these videos, if I watch one of these videos and he's kind of playing around with his toys in a sandbox and someone just happens to be filming him doing that, okay, you got me. I doubt that's the case.
Fair. Okay, good challenge. Maybe putting aside that particular case study, I think there is definitely something about the ease of starting and getting into business. You'll probably see the first self-made teenage billionaire sometime this decade because of technology as an enabler.
There must be some wizard 8-year-old right now doing things with ChatGPT that we can't even begin to imagine. But speaking of, Luke, I just had the best idea of my life. So and I'm not even on Magic Mind, and it didn't even come from the robot. But I came across someone on Twitter who did the meta thing and said he turned ChatGPT 4 into his own personal business AI hustler, right? And said something like, "You are an AI entrepreneur, right? I'm your human enabler. I'm going to do exactly what you tell me to do. Our budget is $100. Don't do anything illegal." And right, that's the frame. And what's great is he's then publicly sharing all the steps and all the results. How is it possible that you and I don't start up our own Luke and Krzysztof side venture, involve the robot, and say we want to start a company that does good for the world, right? Some side project, and we want to get filthy rich doing it and save the world and get filthy rich. Tell us what to do, and then we drink our Magic Mind every day, and how could we go wrong?
Okay, I like it. All right, let's go. Let's do it. Is this a podcast project? We're going to use the podcast to talk about how our business venture has developed.
All right. Is there one more insight?
Yeah, there's actually a bunch in there. Go check out the thread, George__Mac. There's some stuff that's probably not investing related, to do with testosterone and people not being romantic with each other. But one I think does have an interesting investing link is don't ignore India. 2023 is the year India becomes the world's largest population. So it's the world's fastest growing large economy in 2022. In 2017, there were 357 million Indians online. There are now 840 million Indians online, 60% of the population. And here's the interesting bit. In 2021, India exported more in software than Saudi Arabia did in oil, basically exporting like software services, generating $133 billion for the country versus $113 billion in oil exports from Saudi. That's quite interesting. I don't have any investments in India myself, but it's certainly a market we should start turning our eyes to, perhaps.
Absolutely. Here's another tip for our listeners. I've been hearing about this now for over a year, maybe 2 years, because I follow quite closely the thinker Balaji Srinivasan, I believe his last name is. He's a polymath. You'll hear interviews with him last 4 hours and longer, which was they're real fun for the treadmill if you're into that kind of thing. And he's one of those, I think, global geopolitical thinkers that ties tech trends with what's happening in the world at large. That when you listen to him, it's almost like being fed through, water through a fire hose kind of situation. He's been talking about India as the obvious emergent power of the world now for several years. And I believe his main point, you alluded to, Luke, it's not just that population-wise they're getting to the top, but that all of these people that are, I believe he says, they're now coming online. Yep. So it's one of these shifts in the economy that's not just about the demographic, but demographic of people who are in a culture that is tech-minded, internet connected, and they're all of a sudden like in a tidal wave coming online. And I believe India is doing the right things to support this kind of infrastructure. That's what's going to make India the powerhouse, as opposed to, say, some other highly populated country that has say the opposite kind of like you would say China, right, has a inhibitive firewall, like you can't do X, Y, and Z, whereas India is saying no, here's money to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, totally agree. And I guess also they've got these completely different demographic issues. Like China has now a declining population and a demographic time bomb about to go off over the next decade, whereas India has a huge number of young people, and they're going through this population explosion. And as you say, at the same time, it really is a culture that's got sort of education and success at its core. There are a ton of very smart kids in India. I'm actually a person of Indian origin myself. My grandmother was half Bangalorean, and I spent some time out there working for HSBC. But I spent a few months in a few different Indian cities. It's an incredible place with just a ton of energy and a ton of very smart folk. So, yeah, definitely need to start looking at this through an investing lens, I think.
Yeah, and I would love, you're much more skillful at looking at international companies. You've made several investments like that for us at 7i, right? Yeah. I homework assignment wise, I would love to see what you would come up with from starting at the very tippity top, like taking this as a lead, India, right? How do you say narrow down that impossibly large initial query to say 10 companies that are worth poking around at? Is that something that would interest you?
Having seen this stat, it's something I plan to do over the next couple of months. I think it is complex because when you don't live in one of these markets and you're not immersed in the culture and you don't speak any of the hundreds of dialects and languages, there can be things that are opaque and it's hard for a kind of outsider to understand. And for all of the fantastic things about India, it's actually pretty low on the kind of corruption index. They do have a lot of social issues, and so I don't know an Indian example, but we think about like Luckin Coffee in China, right, where it was just like a complete fraud of a business, and it took like an outside investor to really spot that, and then the company came collapsing down. I'm sure there's a bunch of fantastic businesses, but also a bunch of really quite dubious businesses in India. And so I suppose what I'm saying is you have to have that bit of filter perhaps as well. Maybe, try and use your Twitter network. I've got a bunch of Indian friends at home back in London. Try and use people to evaluate and understand whether these companies actually add up and do they make sense.
I would love to follow you on this journey and to hear what you might have to share with us. The process, just what you were describing, right? We have a lead, you have some connections, you have some limited experience in the country, but with all these other tools, it seems like you are like a prime example of someone who could probably find a few gems. I'd love to keep up to date with how you go about that.
Yeah, I'll be digging into it. And actually, I do have a link. So I got interviewed about a year and a half ago by another sort of investing community. Indians invest globally, so I'm going to use this as a opportunity to go reach out to the guys I chatted to there. Some really smart guys who've built quite a big investing community, chatting about exactly this topic. Try and get some of their top tips.
Oh yeah, fantastic.
Yep. So pretty long, all over the place conversation as ever. We're coming up to an hour of recording time. We skipped it last week. So you up for a game of the 3 conversations game before we close this week?
Yes, as long as I'm not the one asking questions.
You can answer. It was my turn. I do have a couple of questions for you. Let's see. So, quick reminder, if you're tuning in at episode 14, I'm going to pitch 3 conversation topics to Krzysztof. He's going to put a line through one of them, and then I'm going to pick one of the other 2, and then he's going to give us a minute of wisdom on that topic, and he has no idea what I'm going to ask him. I did start writing these for episode 13, so my first one is 13 related. Conversation 1. Some cultures are strongly superstitious. For example, the Western number 13, the Chinese number 4. Does it make sense for hotels and offices to skip those numbers when they build their buildings? Question number 2. Which of the 7 deadly sins is most dangerous to an investor? And I can remind you what they are: pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth. And then question number 3 is, you're a very well-read chap, and that huge bookshelf behind you, which book do you wish you could live in? Let's say, obviously, a work of fiction. Which work of fiction do you wish you could live in that world?
Oh, wow. Oh, what a great question. My mind's exploding because I that's the one I want to answer, but then I'll stumble all over myself. Let's nix the superstition question.
Okay. All right. I mean, I kind of want to ask you about the deadly sins, but go on. You want to talk about books, so I'm going to give you that bit of rope. Tell me about which book you're going to live in.
This is impossible. I can't do it, Luke.
Krzysztof, if you're not on the video, Krzysztof's now staring at his bookshelf, trying to spot a world he can occupy. Maybe look at the whiskey first.
Yeah.
It's the trouble with being too widely read.
This is impossible. This is maddeningly impossible. In part because so many books are horrible. I mean, the things that happen in them they're fun to read about, but you don't want to live in that world.
Looks like the answer might be One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Have I defeated you with a question that's too close to your heart?
You have to. Wow, you defeated me. I can't even give you an honest answer. You know what we're gonna do? So I'll acknowledge defeat. I'll pay the consequences, but I'll get you an answer next time we talk.
Okay.
When I've had 2 weeks to really think about it.
All right.
I can give you a very short answer to the question you wanted to ask, because that's obvious to me.
Go on then. I'll give you a pass.
Yeah, the 7 sins, the sin that is most deadly to an investor is pride.
Very good. Yeah. They're all pretty bad.
For obvious reasons, maybe.
Hubris. I've definitely got some hubris from being a bit prideful at the peak of my portfolio spiking in 2021. Got a bit big for my boots. Yeah.
Yeah, that's, that's why it's the thing that brings down all the ancient heroes in all the stories. There you go, right? Read any play, and it's always pride that brings them down. Luke, it was a real pleasure catching up with you. I hope you have an amazing last day on the bunny slope. You can do it. Just point your skis, like you that. Safe travels home. And next time we talk, right, you'll be back eating crumpets and crumpets and drinking tea, correct?
You got it. Yep. Looking forward to it. Fabulous. Great chatting to you, Krzysztof.
All right. Take care.
Take it easy, buddy. And if you enjoyed today's episode of No Limit with Krzysztof and Luke, give us a follow on Twitter and maybe share the episode with a friend. Until next time.